For today's critical thought, we're going to be talking about the topic of re-reviewing a video game, be it due to a second chance revival or due to continued support over years or months after a game's initial release. And as the thumbnail for this video probably has already shown, the big example lately of this has been No Man's Sky. Can't believe it's only been 2 years since that game came out, but following the enormous PR campaign and then just the complete backlash of the game, all getting to the point where Steam took it off of the site for being sold, and even offering a extended return or refund policy on the game, Hello Games went into emergency mode to try and keep people happy, and has since been working on the game and releasing major updates, with as of this week the next big update titled No Man's Sky Next being released, changing more of the systems. They even have added in multiplayer and are still going to be working on the game going forward. But that's where today's point comes into question. At what semblance or what state of a game's continued development does it warrant a re-review? And this is a very interesting topic, and it's one that's unique to video games. Most other mediums, once something has been released, that's it. You're not going to see a movie get version 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 over a period of a year. We may get an extended theatrical cut, but that's about it. But with video games, given how quickly developers can continue to support and change them, especially those who run the games as a service model, these games can look completely different compared to where they were a month ago, a year ago, and so on. And it raises that question of how much change should there be? Now, as I said a minute ago, when it comes to the topic of re-reviews, there's two specific areas that are covered. The first is kind of the redemption play. That is in case like something like No Man's Sky, Skyshine's Bedlam, and the game that's going to be in our video in a second, when a title had a very poor launch. It could be due to misreading the market, major issues being left in, or sometimes just the market completely bouncing off of the title. In these cases, instead of just leaving the game on the storefront and suffering from negative reviews and backlash, developers will try and make amends. This can be as small as changing a few codes or balancing things out to completely rewriting the game. Now, the other example has to do with games as a service, and that's a topic we can certainly talk about again in a future video. But when it comes to long-term game development, the idea of keeping a game supported for months and years at a time, this involves usually having massive content and design balancing. And from games like The Division, Warframe, Payday 2, Team Fortress 2, and the bevy of MOBA style and Battle Royale games, these titles can take on different lives as they go through their development cycle. Going back to Warframe for a second, this is a game that I think it's probably has received the most substantial revision from its initial launch to where it is right now, and developers are still supporting it. And going to Payday 2 and Team Fortress 2, again, these are games that if you look up their initial reviews, they are just no longer relevant to what the game is right now if you decide to play it. And again, that raises this question. How far should a game go? Some people feel that it has to be a substantial improvement. Again, we're talking No Man's Sky, Warframe levels. But this raises a very interesting and poignant criticism. What about that initial review? What about all the people who bought the game on day one, month one, whatever, and have long since given up on that game or have played through all those changes? Is that initial experience relevant anymore? And while we talk about things from the reviewer's end, let's load up some game footage of a title that did go through a second launch. This is footage of the game Brigador, the Up-Armored Edition. A Desert Strike or I think Comanche style game with an amazing synthwave soundtrack, which of course none of you are listening to right now. But I've spoken to the developer, Stellar Jockeys, a few times on our previous casts, and when the game was originally released, it was met with a lot of criticism. One regarding how the content was laid out, and two was the control scheme or how the game was played. The original version featured more of a tank-like control system, again, in essence or in homage to those older style games. But a lot of people had trouble with it, and because of that, it hurt the accessibility of the title. So, Stellar Jockeys went back, and I believe it took them, I want to say 6 months to a year, but I don't remember for sure off the top of my head, to completely redo and rebuild the game's control scheme. They also added in a brand new extended campaign, as well as balancing things out. And in response, they re-released it as Brigador, the Up-Armored Edition. And I really enjoyed the changes, and I know the fan base has been very receptive of it. But, with that said though, I don't think anybody re-reviewed this game or gave it a second look. And this again brings up that point when we talk about re-reviews. Because with so many games being released on a day-to-day basis, it comes down to, does a journalist want to give their time to a game that's already had its chance in the spotlight, or to look at a game that just came out? And I know what a lot of you are about to say, that if you were really caring about games, you should give a game a second chance. And I do agree with that, especially if the title was met with issues at the onset. Stuff like, again, No Man's Sky, Brigador, or even we did the grab bag of Skyshine's Bedlam, as we talked about the grand changes that went into that game over the span of a year. Now, when it comes to this topic of re-reviewing, again, it is such a unique element of game design. Because we don't see, and even with that said, most games, even with continuous support, don't warrant a re-review. Again, adding in new maps or new characters or cosmetic items is not changing your core gameplay loop. But when you're completely rebuilding your UI, completely adding in brand new systems, or even taking apart what's in your game and starting from scratch, that is definitely some extenuating circumstances that should be considered. But here's my question for you folks watching this right now. What should we do with those initial reviews? Some will probably say they should still be factored in or still should be allowed up just to show the span of time. Other people will probably say just take them down because what's the point of having them anymore? And again, it raises such an interesting element when it comes to video games. And as we've talked about before with that split between the consumer and the development side, most consumers don't care about updates and patches in the sense of following the developer for that. They care about what's on their Steam page or what's on their console at this very moment in time. And for instance, with something like No Man's Sky, obviously the game earned a lot of PR, both good and bad. So it's very unlikely at this point that somebody hasn't already heard of the game and probably heard all kinds of nasty things about it. But with a game like Brigador or Skyshine's Bedlam, and again, there's probably many other or smaller examples of this on the independent side, if most people never heard of this game to begin with and probably never read the initial review, should it even matter at this point to have that on? Again, it's not an easy topic, and it's one that I think is probably going to become more and more prevalent as developers embrace online and digital more. We've talked about this before with the idea of having consoles that only are available online for either digital downloads or streaming. But when you have games being supported so often and so majorly like this, these reviews are not going to stand up after a very short period of time. And there's one last thing we didn't talk about that I want to bring up here before we end the video. What happens if a game becomes worse over the long term? And I know that may sound weird, but what happens if a game has changed so much that the initial fans or the initial reason to play the game is no longer in it? Again, there are some famous examples, such as in Payday 2 when they add in the microtransaction safes, or even the argument over the whole hats and item systems that are introduced in Team Fortress. Of course, those elements massively changed and grew their respective games, but at the same time, it changed the initial gameplay loop or the core gameplay loop to something else. And at that point, again, how far or how long do you wait before you do a re-review like that? Because if you remember, Payday 2 got review bombed heavily for that change, and I'm pretty sure No Man's Sky got review bombed as well for that initial release. But when it comes to reviews like this, again, with so many games being released and so many reviews up for a title, it's very hard to have a human interaction saying, okay, all the reviews before this date, we need to get rid of them because the developer just let us know that they released a massive update yesterday. But again, it's just a very hard topic to discuss. But it's one that I encourage developers to look at and especially to consider in terms of being able to keep growing their game and just realizing that just because the initial release is important, that doesn't mean that you can sometimes continue to grow and change things going forward. But thank you so much for watching today's Industry Insight. If you'd like to pitch a topic for a future one, let me know in the comments below. And check back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, have a great night. Before we get to the credits, just a quick shout out to the supporters over on patreon.com/GWBycer. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to check back for our regular streaming, most nights at 9:30, 10 EST. And you'll find a schedule linked down below. For a collection of my writings as well as audio casts on design, you'll find that at game-wisdom.com. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at GWBycer. If you're interested in hanging out and talking about game design topics, we have a Discord channel with the basic tier open to everybody, and that is linked down below as well. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, it is at patreon.com/GWBycer. Your support can help to keep things going and growing, and you can earn rewards such as ad-free versions of our talks, votings for our specific Let's Plays and grab bag streams, and more. But that's it for now. Thanks again for watching. I hope you come back for more great discussions on design here and on GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games.